We'll start with the respiratory system. When we consider the function of the respiratory system, the first function, which is the most important function, which is the gas exchange. We know that our body is going to need oxygen, and there's the waste gas, which is the CO2, and we need to exchange the CO2 for the oxygen. This is very important rule, and usually it happens in the lungs. The second function is the cooling. As we know, this is the operative water loss, and this is very important because through this process, the animal can lose the temperature through the panting, and this is very important in dogs. The chemoreception, and this is the function of the olfactory epithelium that's found in the middle concha. If you remember when we studied the anatomy about the skull, we said we have the dorsal nasal concha, we have the ventral nasal concha, and we have the structure that found in the caudal portion, which is part from the ethmoid bone, which is the middle concha. And usually, these middle concha contain special epithelium, which is called olfactory epithelium, which is responsible for the olfaction process. Vocalization, as we know that in the larynx we have the vocal cord, and this vocal cord is very important in production of the voice. For the respiratory system, usually it divides into two portions. We have the conducting portion and we have the respiratory portion. The conducting portion, from the name, the main function to conduct or deliver the air toward the lung, and usually this starts from the nose to almost the level of the terminal bronchioles, whereas the portion where the actual gas exchange, which is the oxygen exchange for carbon dioxide, which occurs in the alveoli that found in the lung, this portion we call it the respiratory portion. In some animals like carnivores and primate, we have an area which is common for both conducting and respiratory portion. We call it the transitional portion. Usually this is part from the conducting portion, but their wall is interrupted by alveolus, and the alveolus is the structure where the actual gas exchange happens. So we start with the conducting portion. It starts from the area of the nose to reach to the level of the terminal bronchioles. So we have the nose, nasopharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, terminal bronchioles. And usually at this area, we have to warm and moisten and filter the air before it reach the alveolus. So if the air is cold, we need to warm it, add some moisture for it, and very important function to filter out large particles and sand outside and dust outside the alveolus, because we don't need these structures to be collected inside the lung. As I said, we have the actual site, actual site where the gas exchange happens, which is the respiratory portion, which usually contain the alveolus and alveoli, and these structures are the lungs, and this is the actual site for the gas exchange. However, in some animals like primate and carnivores, we have the transitional portion, and this is part from the conducting portion, but the wall is interrupted by alveoli, and these alveoli where we have the gas exchange. When we consider the epithelium of the respiratory portion, we call it the typical respiratory epithelium. And this epithelium is pseudostratified columnar epithelium with goblet cell. So this is the epithelium, ciliated, and we can see here there's the goblet cells. And most of the tract respiratory system contains the typical respiratory epithelium. And this epithelium have very important protective function because we have these cilia feed in one direction toward the upper respiratory system. So this is prevent the collection of the dust and the mucin down in the lower respiratory system. The other function, we have these goblet cells. They have mucus layer, and this mucus layer works as a trap for the dust, and this prevents these dust to reach to the lower respiratory system. Beneath this epithelium, we have some gland, and usually it's found in the submucosal layer, and this gland, the secretion, most of the time, serum mucus gland. We have serum secretion besides the mucus secretion. As I said, this is the epithelium. This is scanning through microscopy. All we can see here, this is the cilia, and these cilia beats or beat in one direction. However, we have goblet cells, and these goblet cells, it's very important. We have mucus coat, and that work as a trap for the dust. Very important. Usually, these cilia beat in one direction. So the typical respiratory epithelium is pseudostratified columnar epithelium ciliated with goblet cells. The first portion of the respiratory system, which is the nose, and this part which protruded through from the face, and usually we have the opening, which is the external nares, and we have the internal nares, and we can see here this is epithelium. Usually it's a skin. However, when we go inside, it changes into mucous membrane, and the area which is the junction between the skin and the mucous membrane, we call it the mucocutaneous junction. At the beginning, from outside, we have the skin, around this area skin. However, the inside, where we have the pink layer, we have the mucus. And the line that separates the mucus from the skin, we call it the mucocutaneous junction. Inside the nose, we have two portions. We have the respiratory region, which is the area responsible for the conducting the air, and we have the typical respiratory epithelium. Whereas in the area in the caudal region, we have the middle concha, which is contain the olfactory epithelium, which is responsible for the olfaction. So we have the nasal cavity, we have the entrance, we call it the vestibule. Then we have the olfactory segment, which is found in the middle concha, and we have the respiratory segment, which is the rest of the area inside the nasal cavity. The opening to the outside, we call it the external nares, which is the nostril opening. The first entrance to the nasal cavity, we call it the vestibule. At the beginning, it's lined by non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. Then it changed into pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium with the goblet cells. It contains fibrissa, which is the short hair, which is very important to filter out large particles. Beneath this epithelium, we have a vascular lamina propria, which contains the serum mucus gland. And it's very important, this vascular lamina, because it's usually responsible for the warming of the air, whereas the serum mucus secretes mucus and serum secretion that works as a trap to remove large dust from the area of the upper respiratory system. So this is the area, the entrance, we call it the vestibule. If we go inside here, there is the area where we have the junction between the mucus and the skin. This is the mucocutaneous junction. Very important in the camel to protect their nose and their respiratory system. During the summertime, they close their external nares. It's completely closed, so no dust can enter to the respiratory system. Beneath the epithelium, we said we have the typical respiratory epithelium, that's a stratified columnar epithelium. We have some erectile tissue, and this is all of it blood sinuses. It can be easily engorged with the blood, can be filled with the blood. As I said, this is very important in the temperature regulation of the incoming air that's going to go to the lower respiratory system. Also can help in the control of the humidity inside the lungs. As I said, beneath the epithelium we have the gland, and this gland, the ceromucous gland. This gland, sometimes their secretion, for example, their secretion, the ceromucous, secretion beside the mucin, which works as a trap. In the area of the olfactory region, which is the area of the middle concha, we have only serous secretion, and this is very important because it's wash the chemoreceptor site, and very important because they prepare it for the next stimulus. We'll talk about it later. As I said, we have the olfactory region, which is found in the caudal region in the area of the middle concha, and usually it contains the special epithelium, which is called the olfactory epithelium. And these olfactory epithelium, most of the time, they are bipolar neuron. Also, we have some other cells. We have the supporting cells and we have the basal cells. The supporting cells, which is the sustentacular cell, the main function to mechanical and nutritional support of the olfactory cells, whereas the basal cells usually is a stem cells that can regenerate both the olfactory cells beside the supporting sustentacular cells. This is the area of the concha. We have the ventral concha, we have the dorsal concha, and the concha that found in the caudal region at this area here, which near the olfactory nerve, this area here is called the middle concha and it's contained the olfactory epithelium. And usually this olfactory epithelium is pseudostratified columnar epithelium. As I said, it's found in the area of the ethmoid concha. Usually consists of three cell types. We have the olfactory cells, we have the supporting sustentacular cells, beside we have the basal cells. Beneath the epithelium, we have the area of the lamina propria, which contains the veins and myelitic nerve beside the Bowman's gland, which is the serous gland. As you can see here, this is the bipolar neuron, and you can see here, this is the dendrites of these neurons, which works as cilia that responsible for the olfaction. Between these cells, which is the olfactory cells, which is bipolar neuron, we have the supporting cells. As I said, these cells, the supporting cells, provide mechanical support beside the nutritional support. Between these cells, we have these cells that found in the bottom did not reach to the level of the lumen. These cells are the basal cells, and usually these cells are stem cells, which are responsible for the regeneration of both the olfactory cells and supportive cells. So, we have this area, the olfactory region, only found in the middle concha and the caudal portion. So when we need to smell something, we have to take the air inside. We have to take a deep breath. We can see here it consists of three cell types. We have the neuronal cells, which is bipolar cells. We call it olfactory cells. Between the olfactory cells, we have supporting cell, which is the sustentacular cells. Also, at this area here, we have the basal cells, which can regenerate and give us the two cell type, the olfactory cells, beside the supporting cells. As we can see here, we have from this bipolar, we have very long cilia. We call it the olfactory cilia. These are very long, non-motile, they cannot move, and these are responsible for the olfaction, which is the main function is the odor receptors. As I said, in the bottom we have the basal cells. We can see here they touch the base membrane. but not reach to the level of the lumen. As I said, they are regenerative stem cells. Beside them, we have the Bowman's gland, and this Bowman gland secrete serous secretion, and these serous secretions very important. First of all, they're responsible for the dissolve of the secretion and can be easily detected by the cilia. So any chemicals they have first to dissolve in water, and this water or serous secretion come from the Bowman's gland, then can be detected by the cilia. The other function, this secretion, after we smell something, we need to smell another thing. These glands, the Bowman's glands, secrete their secretion, and they're usually responsible for the flush out of these chemicals and prepare these cilia for a new stimuli. So again here, this is the area. It's called the olfactory epithelium, pseudostratified columnar, because all of the cells touch the basement membrane, but not all the cells reach to the lumen. They are one single cell layer, but we have different nucleoli in different levels. This cell here with the long motile cilia, this here, the binucleated, this is the bipolar neurons. Between them, we have these cells here, which is the supportive cell. We call it supporting cells or subtentacular cells. Down there, near the basement, we have the stem cell, which is responsible for the regeneration of both olfactory cells beside the subtentacular cells. As I said, the olfactory cells are formed of bipolar neuron. They have the dendrites, and these dendrites are modified cilia, and they are non-motile. And the axons from here extend toward the olfactory nerves. See here, this is the olfactory with their long non-motile cilia, and between them we have the subtentacular cells and the cells that we can see here at the bottom here. These cells, which is the stem cell or regenerative cells. The other portion after the nasal cavity, we have the nasopharynx, which communicates, communicates with the caudal portion of the nasal cavity, and this portion becomes at the oropharynx at the level of the soft palate. You remember we divide the pharynx into three regions. We have the caudal portion of the nasal cavity, or the posterior continuation, we call it the nasopharynx. The caudal continuation of the oral cavity, we call it the oropharynx, and the area near the larynx, which is the laryngopharynx. Usually the area of the nasopharynx, the epithelium, is typical respiratory epithelium. When I say typical respiratory epithelium, I mean pseudostratified columnar epithelium with goblet cell and cilia. Sometimes in the area of the lamina propria, this area here, we have serum mucus gland, and sometimes we have some collection and aggregation of lymphatic tissue, and this is, we call it the nasopharyngeal tonsil. So this is the epithelium, which is the typical respiratory epithelium, which is the pseudostratified columnar cell with goblet cell and ciliated. And you can see here, this is the area of the lamina propria where we have the glands, and usually this gland is serum mucus gland. The other organ after the nasopharynx, we have the larynx, and the larynx we have the cartilages, which contain hyaline cartilage, and we have the elastic cartilage. For the epithelium, and this area here will be typical respiratory epithelium, which is the pseudostratified columnar epithelium.